Hello, my name is Mark Birch. I'm a principal startup advocate for Asia Pacific Japan at Amazon Web Services. I'm also the author of a book called Community in a Box about building communities and was previously at Stack Overflow. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about building internal developer communities, why it matters to you, and how to build your own. But before we begin, I need to set some context, and the story begins on November 21st, 1960. It was a terrible day for NASA and the US space program. The Americans were already far behind the Soviets in the space race when they launched their first unmanned test flight, the Mercury Redstone 1, which unfortunately lifted 4 inches off the ground before crashing. The analysis afterwards, they realized that the rocket and the capsule were incorrectly coupled together. The book of Team of Teams goes into this in more detail, saying the following. The interface failures, however, exposed an inherent problem. Independent small groups were good at exploratory work, but trouble erupted when the projects of disparate teams had to be integrated into the vehicle going into orbit. A couple decades later, another disaster, this time Chernobyl. It was a lack of understanding the imminent danger that the power plant was in, a culture of arrogance, and the inability for managers to listen to engineers that caused a cascade of errors that led to the worst nuclear accident in human history. The result was the evacuation of 300,000 people, increased cancer risk across the population, and cost an estimated 235 billion USD in damages. What's the common thread in these disasters and many others? It's a failure to communicate. We have plenty of ways to communicate, whether it's email, phone, Zoom, Slack, WhatsApp, what have you. But what we're trying to communicate oftentimes simply does not connect. And what enables communication that connects, that can be heard, and can inspire action across teams, peoples, and organizations? The bond I speak of is called community. Community is that sense of identity about who we are and what we care about. It's through community that we develop cultural norms that define our common beliefs. These norms lead to ways of engaging and communicating with each other, building trust and fostering safety. Community, therefore, is inherently a mechanism for collaborative communication. And developers know this. From the very beginning of the dawn of open source, they understood the power of community. There's a natural inclination to share, which has led to incredible communities like GitHub and Stack Overflow. And this is why open source powers 96% of the software out there today. Developers know that collaboration leads to better solutions, less reinventing the wheel, and improved software quality. So why is it so hard to develop these developer communities inside our companies? It often feels like being alone in a forest. It would seem like a natural opportunity to bring groups together that have common interests and a common vision, like an engineering organization. Yet when I visit most companies and I see their communities, they're sorely lacking in collaboration and sometimes even actively discouraged because of organizational silos, politics, and personal agendas. So for the rest of this talk, I want to share practices that I've learned over the past decade in building communities so I could help all of us in this journey to build healthy and thriving internal developer communities. So let's begin with the ingredients that make communities work, starting with a game in the park. Many years ago, I went off to San Francisco to pursue my .com 1.0 internet dreams. And I didn't know anyone there, but over time I made friends, including a group that I met walking across Golden Gate Park one day who needed an extra person for their 5-on-5 flag football team. Over time, that 5-on-5 became 12-on-12. Became complicated. We had playbooks. I went out for a route one day, jumped up to get a ball, and got hammered by 5 other people. That ended my flag football glory days. And funny enough, a few weeks after that, I learned that are 12 on 12 end up growing to 15 on 15, which leads to our first principle, which is participation is a tricky thing to get right. Many people, and you have a big mess like flag football or trying to be in Times Square in New York City during New Year's Eve. Just too many people. But if you have the opposite, you have too few people, it feels like a ghost town, or it feels like a party where no one shows up. It's a market dynamics problem. Ideally, you want to get the balance right between too much and too little involvement. The next ingredient I want to talk about is trust. It's a glue that brings us all together and makes us want to help each other. I call this the trust layer, and it's the foundation of any community. So how do you develop this trust layer? Well, I'll talk about that in a few slides, but ultimately it comes down to encouraging people to actively participate and providing incentives for positive contributions. Now, when I talk about trust, everyone assumes that everyone must be on board. Well, that's actually the first and most fundamental mistake about building communities. Community is not something that you force people into. A community is something that it grows organically, and it only happens because people see value in it. I often say having everyone or even most people involved isn't success. A success of a community is in the value that it creates. But you still probably need a minimum number of people to be involved, right? How many is enough? A decade ago, I read a post called 1,000 True Fans. In it, the author says that an artist doesn't need millions of fans to be successful. They only need 1,000 die-hard fans to support the artist. The internet also works in a very similar manner. A site doesn't need millions. A site just needs enough of those fans to sustain itself. How big is that core fan base versus all of the other casual fans? Well, there's a concept called participation inequality. And it was introduced by Will Hill at AT&T Laboratories back in the 90s. Well, the 2000s started to roll in. The internet was booming, online communities were growing, and this rule became known as the 99-1 rule. And the idea is that in any online community, you're going to have different tiers of participation. The 1% are going to be highly involved and active, 9%, moderately active, and then 90% are what we're going to call lurkers. Those are people that are kind of looking in the wings, they're kind of poking around. And oftentimes, that's how most of us experience communities today. Look at places like Reddit or Stack Overflow. You might think, wow, that's really low. Is that really healthy? Well, let's flip the question on its head. Even if of the 50 million people that visit Stack Overflow every month, if 50% of those were actively contributing, the site would become unusable because moderators wouldn't be able to track and manage all of the influx of activity and contributions that are coming in. And most of us can kind of relate if you have Slack at work or some other messaging app. In fact, one friend of mine who's a CTO of a global bank once called their internal Slack a dumpster fire of gibberish because it was just full of condo listings and cat pictures and bus schedules and birthday best wishes. In large communities, having a lot of people involved or too many people involved actually causes a worse user experience and decreases participation. For internet scale communities, though, 99-1 ratio makes sense. But what about your company? You may be thinking, wow, I only have 200 people in my engineering organization. Does that mean 2 people are going to be actively involved and only 20 moderately involved? Well, the good news is that in some research, it was discovered that about 10% will be actively involved and up to 40% will be moderately involved in an internal community if you build the community right. Which gets us to how you actually do it. Now that we know the basics, what are the steps to get there to build a strong and healthy community? And over the years of building communities, I learned a few of these things, doing this from the ground up, that I distilled into 8 specific steps to help structure the growth of our community from the onset. At the very beginning, you want to be able to define the why. Before even beginning, Ask people you want to have be part of this community. What's in it for me? Or WIIFM for short. That way you know who's going to be involved and what they're going to get out of the experience of being involved. You want to be able to create value up front as well. It's easier for people to participate if they know what they're getting into. So I often recommend seeding the community ahead of time with content, activities, events to get people involved. And that leads to making it easier for people to contribute. It's an opportunity to lower the barriers and make it easy for people to get on board at a level that they feel comfortable at. But you're going to have those super fans that we talked about before, and rally those fans. The people are going to be super excited about having a community. They're going to be your evangelists. So use their networks to help promote the community. Those super fans are also going to be active contributors, most likely. So use mechanisms like newsletters, chat apps, lunch and learns, and so on to actively promote those good contributions so that your lurkers and moderately engaged users know what great content looks like. You also want to incentivize contributions to get people to continue to contribute. And the best way to do that is through recognition. So rewards like swag, tickets to tech events, and other types of rewards will also work in this regard. A community will not work, though, if it's not integrated or something that is part of a person's daily experience at work. So find ways of trying to weave that in, and also definitely make it part of your onboarding programs so new employees are part of the community and understand its value from day one. And lastly, make sure your leadership is involved. When people see that leaders are engaging, it's a sign and a signal that it's okay to contribute and that it's actively encouraged. The thing about IT managers and leaders, though, is that even though they believe in the power of community, they understand it'd be a great place for their engineers to collaborate and help each other. They understand the promise of better productivity and the fact that it can help with the flow of work. I still run into a lot of skepticism talking about community because they want to understand, how is it going to scale? And is it just going to become another failed collaboration project? I can sympathize because I was involved in these online collaboration platforms early on, starting with Lotus Notes. It was one of the first efforts at building collaborative communities using things called groupware. But being a user of their apps and their email program, I can attest that it had possibly the worst user experience ever. Later on, companies migrated to things like Outlook and SharePoint to build their vision of a connected community. And later on, moved on to social collaboration tools like Yammer, Jive, and other things. But unsurprisingly, these tools did not win any fans, and it was adoption by management dictate. Many think it's because of the chicken or egg problem or the empty database problem. Inherently, when deploying these types of platforms, there's very little in the community to begin with. People have to contribute to make these platforms work. So how do you get people excited enough to contribute early on into the community? Interestingly enough, Facebook cracked this problem early on. They delivered something that was immediately valuable, an online student directory where users can message each other. And this hit upon the innate need of every incoming college student, which is to make friends. It was the what's in it for me to hook users. Many efforts to build community oftentimes neglects this core aspect. You've got to be able to address the innate why in order to draw people in to participate. So we talked about the why, though. The second part of this, though, is how to actually scale that. Facebook also solved this problem in tiering their user acquisition. They didn't open it up to everyone at first. At first, it was only open to students with a Harvard email. Then they conquered Harvard and moved on to a smaller group of schools. Then it was anyone who had a .edu email domain. And then they opened up to everyone in the US and then the globe. The reason Facebook's strategy worked is because of Metcalfe's law. something that was coined by Robert Metcalfe, the inventor of the Ethernet many years ago. It simply states that the value of a network grows by n squared with each additional node. Translate that into the social networking world, every additional user adds exponential value. Opening up the floodgates to everyone, however, that has a potential to backfire. So scaling a community by stages ensures that the community doesn't suffer from the empty database problem that I discussed before, but also that it doesn't fall into chaos. So how do you scale community growth? I have a concept that I call the 50, 500, 5,000 principle. It's a structured yet organic way of scaling up a community by magnitudes, similar to how Facebook treated their tiered growth. At 50 level, you want your most engaged and supportive users. You can trust this group to contribute, to add content, to engage with each other. And by creating and engaging, they're also setting the cultural norms of the community, which is important at the next stage, which is the 500 stage. This is where you start to test the community and you bring on more additional groups of users similar to that first group of 50. And if you've done a good job seeding the community, well, people are going to understand how to get involved. They're going to understand how to engage and what constitutes good contributions. You still want to keep this group small, though, so that you can monitor, tweak, and build up the repository of trust. Lastly, you have the 5,000 level, where you open the community to the company at large. This is when organic growth becomes viral growth, and it gets really exciting. And this is driven by Metcalfe's law. The more people that are involved, the more value that gets generated at a faster rate. Of course, there are many more complexities faced when developing and building your own internal developer community. Building community is hard. Getting people to share openly is a massive cultural shift. But if you optimize for the why and you scale your community through the 50, 500, 5,000 approach, you will find success. And if you want to learn more about building communities, I highly recommend my book, Community in a Box, that goes into all of the details about strategies and tactics of community building. Thanks again. I'm Mark Birch at AWS. You can contact me over Twitter, LinkedIn, email, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Enjoy the rest of the talks at Stack 2020 and take care. Bye now.